Commander Jake Morrison stood at the large window of New Horizons Station, watching the massive alien ship approach Earth's orbit. The vessel looked like a silver needle against the black space, elegant and cold. 3 years had passed since first contact with the Velathi Empire, but Jake still felt nervous before their visits. "They're early," said Dr. Lisa Chen, joining him at the window. She carried a tablet filled with notes about alien customs and protocols. Lisa had spent months learning about Velathi culture, trying to understand beings that seemed to have no emotions at all. 30 minutes ahead of schedule, Jake agreed. He checked his watch and sighed. "I hope we're ready for them." The Velathi were nothing like humans had imagined aliens would be. They stood tall and thin with pale blue skin that seemed to glow softly. Their faces showed no expressions, and they spoke in flat, emotionless voices. They came to trade rare metals for human technology, but they kept all contact strictly business. Jake had commanded New Horizons Station for 5 years. He had dealt with pirates, asteroid miners, and corporate politics. But the Velathi made him more uncomfortable than any of those challenges. They followed rules that no human fully understood, and they seemed to think humans were barely civilized. The delegation manifest came through, Lisa said, reading from her tablet. "Ambassador Kethavar is leading the group again. But there's a new name here. Sixandra. She's listed as a diplomatic attaché." Jake nodded. "Probably being trained for future missions. The Velathi like to start their people young in diplomatic work." The station's communication system crackled to life. "Commander Morrison, this is Velathi Vessel Eternal Purpose requesting permission to dock." Jake walked to the communication panel. "Permission granted, Eternal Purpose. Bay 7 is prepared for your arrival." "Acknowledged. We will arrive in 17 minutes." The communication ended without any pleasantries. The Velathi never said hello or goodbye, never asked how anyone was doing. Everything was purely functional. Lisa shook her head. "I still can't get used to how cold they are. It's like talking to computers." "Maybe that's how they stay so peaceful," Jake said. "No emotions means no conflicts." "No conflicts, but also no joy, no friendship, no love," Lisa replied. "I wonder if they ever laugh." Jake had wondered the same thing many times. The Velathi Empire controlled dozens of star systems and had never fought a war. They solved all problems through logic and strict rules. Humans found this impressive, but also sad. 20 minutes later, Jake and Lisa waited in Bay 7 as the Velathi shuttle landed. The bay had been prepared according to exact specifications. The temperature was set to exactly 18 degrees Celsius. The lighting was dimmed to 60% of normal levels. Even the air mixture had been adjusted to match Velathi preferences. The shuttle door opened with a soft hiss. Ambassador Kethavar stepped out first, tall and imposing in his flowing gray robes. His pale blue face showed no expression as he looked around the bay. Behind him came 3 other Velathi, all wearing similar robes. The last to exit was different. She was younger than the others and shorter. Her robes were a lighter shade of gray, marking her junior status. When she looked around the bay, Jake thought he saw something flicker across her face. Curiosity, maybe. It was gone so quickly he might have imagined it. "Ambassador Kethavar," Jake said, stepping forward with a formal bow. "Welcome back to New Horizons Station." "Commander Morrison," Kethavar replied without emotion. "We are here to continue trade negotiations as scheduled." "Of course, Dr. Chen will escort you to the conference room." Lisa stepped forward and bowed to the delegation. "Honored guests, please follow me." As the group moved through the station corridors, Jake noticed the young Velathi looking around with what seemed like interest. Her head turned slightly toward the sounds coming from the recreation area, where off-duty crew members were playing music and laughing. In the conference room, formal introductions were made. The young Velathi was indeed Zixandra, new to diplomatic service. She spoke only when addressed directly, but Jake caught her looking around the room when she thought no one was watching. "We have prepared quarters for your delegation according to your specifications," Lisa said. "You may rest before tomorrow's negotiations begin." "That is acceptable," Kethavar said. "We require no assistance." The Velathi filed out of the conference room in order of rank. Zixandra was last, and as she passed Jake, she paused for just a moment. She seemed to be listening to something. Jake followed her gaze and realized she was looking toward the cafeteria, where the evening meal service was beginning. "Is something wrong?" Jake asked quietly. Zixandra looked startled, as if she had been caught doing something forbidden. No, nothing is wrong. I was simply observing. The cafeteria serves meals until 2100 hours if you're interested in seeing human food preparation. Something changed in her expression. Her pale eyes seemed to brighten slightly. That would be educational. Zixandra, came Kethvar's sharp voice from down the corridor. You will report to quarters immediately. Yes, Ambassador, she replied. But Jake noticed she looked back toward the cafeteria as she walked away. Later that evening, Jake found Lisa in the observation lounge reviewing notes for tomorrow's meetings. What did you think of the new one? He asked, settling into a chair beside her. Zixandra, she seemed different, more aware maybe. Did you see how she reacted to the sounds from the rec area? Jake nodded. And she was interested in the cafeteria. That's the first time I've seen a Velothi show curiosity about anything human. Their training probably forbids personal interest in other cultures, Lisa said. But she's young. Maybe the curiosity is still there, just hidden. Through the large windows, they could see the Velothi ship floating silently in space. Its smooth hull reflected Earth's blue light, beautiful but cold. Do you think they're happy? Lisa asked. Living with so many rules, never expressing emotion. Jake thought about Zixandra's brief moment of curiosity, quickly suppressed when her superior called to her. I don't know, but I think at least one of them might be wondering what they're missing. The station continued its quiet rotation around Earth, carrying humans and aliens who lived by completely different rules. Tomorrow would bring more formal negotiations, more careful protocols, more polite distance between species. But Jake had a feeling that something had changed today, something small but important. In the Velothi quarters, Zixandra lay on her assigned sleeping platform, staring at the ceiling. She could still hear faint sounds from the human areas of the station, laughter, music, the clatter of dishes from their eating area. Her people called such sounds chaotic noise pollution, but to her they seemed like something else entirely. They seemed like life. Zixandra woke before the station's artificial dawn. She had not slept well, her mind filled with strange new sounds and sights from the human areas. The delegation quarters were silent and sterile, exactly as Velothi preferred. But the silence felt different now, empty rather than peaceful. She performed her morning routine quickly and quietly. As a junior diplomat, she was expected to review cultural briefings before each day's negotiations. The files described human behavior in clinical terms, prone to emotional outbursts, illogical decision-making patterns, inefficient social structures. But what she had observed yesterday did not match these descriptions. The humans seemed organized and purposeful. Their laughter had sounded joyful, not chaotic. Their music had patterns and harmony that her enhanced hearing could appreciate, even if her training told her it was meaningless noise. A soft chime indicated that Ambassador Kethvar required her presence. She found him in the delegation's meeting room reviewing trade documents on a holographic display. Zixandra, he said without looking up, you will observe today's negotiations but will not speak unless directly addressed. You are here to learn proper diplomatic conduct. Yes, Ambassador. I have reviewed yesterday's security recordings. You showed inappropriate interest in human activities. This must not happen again. Zixandra felt a strange sensation in her chest, something her people would call improper emotional response. I was merely observing to better understand our hosts. Kethvar finally looked at her, his pale eyes cold. Humans are useful trading partners, nothing more. Their chaotic culture offers nothing of value to proper beings. Do not let their disorderly ways contaminate your thinking. Of course, Ambassador. But as they walked to the conference room, Zixandra found herself listening again to the sounds of human life around them. Footsteps with different rhythms, voices with various tones. The distant hum of what she now knew was their food preparation area. The morning negotiations were tedious discussions about metal purity standards and shipping schedules. Zixandra sat silently beside Kethvar, taking notes as required. But she found herself watching the human negotiators more than listening to their words. Dr. Lisa Chen was particularly interesting. She spoke with careful precision when discussing technical matters, but her voice became warmer when addressing personal concerns. Commander Morrison showed subtle changes in expression that seemed to communicate meaning beyond his words. These humans had layers of communication that Velothi protocols never acknowledged. During a break in negotiations, Dr. Chen approached Zixandra while the senior diplomats discussed details in another room. "How are you finding your first diplomatic mission?" Lisa asked. Zixandra hesitated. Proper protocol was to give a standard response about duty and learning. Instead, she heard herself saying, "It is very different from what I expected." "Different how?" "Your people are not as the briefings described. You seem more organized, more purposeful." Lisa smiled, an expression Zixandra found fascinating. Velity faces never made such movements. "Maybe our briefings about your people aren't completely accurate either. Would you like to see more of the station during the next break?" Before Zixandra could answer, Kethvar returned to the room. His sharp gaze moved between the two females, and Zixandra quickly looked down at her notes. The afternoon brought more negotiations, but Zixandra's attention kept wandering. She noticed how the humans paused to drink liquid from containers, how they occasionally shared quiet comments that made them smile, how they seemed relaxed even during serious discussions. When the day's formal meetings ended, Kethvar dismissed her with instructions to study the next day's agenda. But instead of returning directly to quarters, Zixandra found herself walking toward the station's central area. The corridor led past the cafeteria, and the aromas that reached her were unlike anything in her experience. Velothi consumed nutrition blocks that provided all required elements without unnecessary sensory stimulation. But these human food smells triggered responses in her brain that she did not understand. She paused outside the cafeteria entrance, watching through the transparent doors. Humans sat at tables in small groups, consuming various colored substances from plates. They talked and laughed while eating, making the meal into a social activity rather than simple nutrition intake. "Would you like to try some?" Zixandra turned quickly to find Commander Morrison standing behind her, carrying his own meal on a tray. "I was simply observing human feeding rituals," she said formally. "It's called dinner," Jake said with a gentle smile, "and it's more than just eating. It's how we connect with each other." Zixandra looked back through the doors. "Your people eat together by choice?" "Usually. Food tastes better when shared with friends." The concept made no logical sense. Nutrition was nutrition regardless of social circumstances. But watching the humans, Zixandra could see something happening beyond simple feeding. They were exchanging information, strengthening social bonds, expressing emotions through facial movements and voice tones. "Ambassador Kethvar says human eating habits are inefficient," she said. Jake laughed, a sound that made something warm stir in Zixandra's chest. "He's probably right. We could get all our nutrients from pills and be done in 5 minutes. But efficiency isn't everything. What else is there?" Jake looked at her with genuine interest. "Pleasure, comfort, memory. When I eat my grandmother's apple pie recipe, I remember being a child in her kitchen. When I share a meal with friends, I feel connected to them. Food carries more than just nutrition." These concepts were completely outside Velothi understanding. Emotional associations with consumption, social bonding through shared activities, memories triggered by sensory input. None of this appeared in diplomatic briefings. "Would you like to try something simple?" Jake asked quietly. Just to understand human culture better. Zixandra knew she should refuse. Contact with alien food was forbidden without proper medical clearance. But her curiosity was stronger than her training. "What would you recommend?" Jake smiled and led her to a quiet corner table. He returned a few minutes later with a small plate containing a simple sandwich cut into triangular pieces. "This is basic human food," he explained. "Bread, cheese, and vegetables. Nothing exotic." Zixandra stared at the triangular objects. They looked strange and irregular compared to uniform nutrition blocks. But the aroma was making her mouth produce extra saliva, a response she had never experienced. "How do I—" "Just pick it up and bite it. Your digestive system can handle human food. Our medical teams confirmed biological compatibility months ago." With careful movements, Zixandra lifted one triangle to her mouth and took a small bite. The explosion of sensations was overwhelming. Multiple flavors combined in ways that her enhanced taste receptors had never experienced. The bread was soft and slightly sweet, the cheese rich and complex, the vegetables crisp and fresh. But more than just taste, there was something else. A feeling of warmth and satisfaction that had nothing to do with nutrition. Her mind made connections she did not understand, linking the flavors to concepts of comfort and care. "What is happening to me?" she whispered. "You're experiencing what we call flavor," Jake said gently. Your people must have taste receptors too, or you wouldn't have reacted so strongly. Zixandra took another bite, smaller this time. The sensations were still intense but less overwhelming. She began to understand how the different elements work together, creating something greater than the sum of their parts. This is forbidden, she said, but she did not stop eating. Sometimes the best things are, Jake replied. As she finished the sandwich, Zixandra felt something changing inside her. The sterile efficiency of Velothi nutrition suddenly seemed empty and sad. This simple human meal had given her something she had not known she was missing. I must return to quarters, she said reluctantly. Of course, but Zixandra, if you ever want to learn more about human culture, Dr. Chen and I would be happy to help. Walking back to the Velothi quarters, Zixandra could still taste the sandwich, but more than that, she could still feel the warmth of Jake's kindness, the sense of sharing something meaningful. These were dangerous thoughts for a Velothi diplomat, but she could not make them stop. In her sleeping chamber, she lay awake again, but this time her mind was filled with new sensations and possibilities. The taste of human food had awakened something in her that she did not have words for. Outside her door, the station hummed with quiet human activity. For the first time, it did not sound like chaos. It sounded like life, rich and complicated and beautiful. She closed her eyes and let herself remember the taste of bread and cheese and vegetables, and the feeling of being welcomed by people who barely knew her. Tomorrow would bring more negotiations, more formal protocols, more careful distance between species. But tonight Zixandra had tasted something forbidden, and she wanted more. 3 days passed since Zixandra's first taste of human food, and she found herself thinking about it constantly. During formal negotiations, she caught herself watching how humans moved their hands while speaking, how their expressions changed with their emotions, how they paused to drink coffee and seemed more alert afterward. Dr. Lisa Chen had noticed her interest and began explaining small cultural details during breaks between meetings. How humans use different foods for different purposes. Coffee for energy, tea for relaxation, chocolate for comfort. These concepts fascinated Zixandra, even though they made no logical sense according to Velothi understanding. Your people never eat for pleasure? Lisa asked during one quiet moment when Ambassador Kethvar was reviewing trade documents with Commander Morrison. Pleasure is considered inefficient, Zixandra replied automatically, then added more quietly, but I begin to wonder if efficiency is the only important thing. Lisa smiled. Would you like to learn more about human food culture? We're having a small cooking demonstration in the recreation area tonight. Just a few crew members learning to make pasta from one of our Italian crew members. Zixandra felt that strange warm sensation in her chest again. The desire to accept was strong, but so was her fear of breaking protocols. I should not. Ambassador Kethvar expects me to study tomorrow's agenda. The AU demonstration starts at 1900 hours and ends by 2030. You could still have time for your studies. The rest of the day dragged slowly. Through technical discussions about shipping, schedules, and quality control measures, Zixandra performed her duties correctly, taking notes and observing as required. But her mind kept returning to Lisa's invitation. When evening came, she completed her required agenda review in record time. The delegation quarters were quiet. The other Velothi were in their meditation chambers following their usual evening routine. Zixandra stood at her door for long minutes, knowing that leaving would be breaking unofficial rules about contact with humans outside formal duties. Finally, curiosity won over caution. The recreation area was livelier than she had ever seen it. About a dozen humans had gathered around a food preparation station, laughing and talking while one man demonstrated how to make something called pasta. The sounds and smells were overwhelming at first, but Zixandra found herself drawn closer. You came. Lisa appeared beside her, looking genuinely pleased. Come on, Tony is just starting to explain how to make the sauce. Zixandra allowed herself to be led into the group. The humans made room for her without seeming surprised by her presence. Tony, a dark-haired man with expressive hand gestures, was explaining how to combine tomatoes, herbs, and oil in precise but flexible proportions. The secret is not following the recipe exactly, he said, adding a pinch of something green to a pan. You taste as you go and adjust. Cooking is about feeling, not just measuring. This concept amazed Zixandra. Velothi preparation methods required exact measurements and procedures. The idea of changing quantities based on personal preference seemed chaotic, but she watched Tony create something that smelled wonderful through pure instinct and experience. "Would you like to try stirring the sauce?" Tony asked, offering her a wooden spoon. Zixandra looked around nervously, but the humans seemed encouraging rather than judgmental. She took the spoon and carefully moved it through the red mixture. The smell rose up stronger now, complex and rich. "Good. You're getting the feel for it," Tony said. "Now taste it and tell me what you think." He handed her a small spoon with a bit of the sauce. Zixandra hesitated only a moment before tasting it. The explosion of flavors was even more complex than the sandwich had been. Sweet tomatoes, sharp herbs, smooth oil, and underneath it all, something that could only be described as warmth and comfort. "It's wonderful," she said honestly, "but how do you know when it's correct?" "There's no single correct way," Tony laughed. "That's the beauty of cooking. Everyone makes it a little different." This idea challenged everything Zixandra had been taught about proper procedures. In Velothi society, there was always one correct method, one approved result. But these humans seemed to celebrate variations and personal expression. As the evening continued, she found herself helping with various tasks. She learned to tell when pasta was properly cooked by testing its texture. She watched humans share bites of food with each other, offering tastes and opinions. She participated in conversations that jumped from cooking techniques to personal stories to plans for tomorrow. Most surprising of all, she found herself laughing. The sound came out of her throat without conscious decision, triggered by a funny story about Tony's first cooking disaster. Several humans looked at her with delight as if her laughter was a gift. "I have never heard a Velothi laugh before," said Kate, a young engineer. "It's a beautiful sound." Zixandra felt warmth spread through her chest. Among her own people, laughter was considered a sign of mental instability. But here it seemed to create connection and joy. When the pasta was finished, everyone sat together to eat. Zixandra found herself between Lisa and Jake, sharing a meal that tasted better than anything she had ever experienced. But more than the food, she enjoyed the conversation, the sense of belonging, the feeling that her thoughts and opinions mattered to these people. "This is how humans always eat?" she asked Jake. "When we can," he replied. "Good food, good friends, good conversation. It's one of the things that makes life worth living." Worth living. The phrase stuck in her mind. Velothi lived efficiently, productively, logically. But did they live in a way that was worth the effort? The evening ended too soon. As crew members began cleaning up, Zixandra realized she had been gone from quarters for over 2 hours. A flutter of panic went through her. What if Ambassador Kethvar had checked on her? "Thank you," she said to the group. "This was educational. Come back any time," Tony said. "I'm planning to teach bread making next week." Walking back to the delegation quarters, Zixandra's mind buzzed with new experiences and ideas. She had participated in chaotic food preparation and nothing terrible had happened. In fact, something wonderful had happened. She had felt connected to other beings in a way that pure logic could never achieve. But as she approached the delegation area, her steps slowed. The sterile corridors seemed colder after the warmth of the recreation area. The silence felt empty after the lively conversation. She entered her sleeping chamber quietly, hoping no one had noticed her absence. But as she prepared for rest, she heard footsteps in the corridor outside. They stopped at her door. "Zixandra." Ambassador Kethvar's voice was quiet but sharp. "Report to my chambers immediately." Her stomach dropped. She had been discovered. Kethvar's chamber was larger than hers but equally austere. He stood with his back to her, looking out a small window at the stars. "You were absent from quarters for 2 hours and 17 minutes, he said without turning around. "Where were you?" Zixandra considered lying, but Velothi were taught that deception was inefficient. "I was observing human cultural activities in their recreation area." "For over 2 hours." "Yes, Ambassador." He turned to face her, his pale eyes reflecting no emotion. "What was the nature of these activities?" "Food preparation and consumption. I was gathering cultural intelligence. By participating?" Zixandra's silence was answer enough. Kethvar walked closer, studying her face with clinical attention. "Your biomarkers have been showing anomalous readings for the past 3 days. Elevated stress hormones, irregular brain chemistry, unusual cellular activity. I had hoped these were temporary adjustment reactions to extended alien contact." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was colder than space itself. But now I see the truth. You have been contaminated by human influence. Their chaotic emotional patterns are infecting your thinking processes. I do not feel contaminated, Zixandra said carefully. I feel more aware, more alive. Exactly. Kethvar's voice rose slightly, the closest thing to emotion she had ever heard from him. That sensation of being alive is the contamination. It is the dangerous chaos that humans mistake for consciousness. He walked to his desk and activated a communication device. I am filing a formal report with the High Council. You will be recalled immediately for decontamination procedures. Fear shot through Zixandra, but it was a different kind of fear than she had ever felt. Not fear of punishment, but fear of losing something precious that she had just discovered. Ambassador, please. I have learned valuable intelligence about human psychology. My experiences could help improve diplomatic relations. Your experiences have made you unfit for diplomatic service, Kethvar replied coldly. The humans have done exactly what our intelligence warned they would do. They have infected you with their emotional instability and made you believe it is improvement. He turned back to his communication device, but Zixandra stepped forward. What if it is improvement? She asked quietly. Kethvar froze. What did you say? What if the humans are not contaminating us? What if they are showing us something we have lost? Tonight I felt connections with other beings that pure logic cannot create. I experienced joy and laughter and belonging. How can these things be contamination? For a long moment, Kethvar stared at her with something that might have been horror. You are worse than I thought. The infection has reached your core reasoning. Zixandra barely slept after her confrontation with Ambassador Kethvar. She knew that Valathi extraction ships would arrive within days and her fate would be sealed. The decontamination procedures were rumored to be thorough and permanent, removing all traces of emotional development and creative thinking. Morning brought an emergency meeting of all diplomatic personnel. Zixandra sat silently as Kethvar announced that their mission was being cut short due to security concerns regarding human influence on delegation members. Commander Morrison looked confused. Ambassador, we weren't aware of any security issues. Has someone been threatened? The threat is more subtle than physical violence, Kethvar replied coldly. Humans possess a form of psychological contamination that affects other species through prolonged contact. This contamination presents itself as enhanced emotional responses and irrational decision-making. Dr. Lisa Chen leaned forward. Are you saying that friendship and cultural exchange are contamination? I am saying that human emotional chaos is infectious and dangerous to properly developed minds. Jake's face showed the kind of controlled anger that Zixandra had learned to recognize. With respect, Ambassador, I think you're misunderstanding what you're seeing. Cultural exchange has always made beings stronger, not weaker. Commander Morrison, Kethvar said, you will prepare docking facilities for Valathi enforcement vessels. They will arrive tomorrow to ensure proper quarantine procedures are followed. The word quarantine sent ice through Zixandra's veins. She had heard whispers about Valathi quarantine procedures. They didn't just isolate contaminated individuals. They sterilized entire areas where contamination had occurred. After the meeting, Jake caught her in the corridor outside the conference room. Zixandra, what exactly is happening here? What do they mean by enforcement vessels? She looked around nervously to make sure Kethvar was not watching. Commander Morrison, you and your people may be in serious danger. When my government speaks of quarantine, they mean complete isolation. Your station could be what? Sterilized. Made safe for future contact by removing all sources of contamination. Jake's face went pale. Are you saying they plan to attack New Horizon? Not attack. Cleanse. They will demand that all humans submit to emotional sterilization procedures. If you refuse... She couldn't finish the sentence, but Jake understood. His jaw tightened with determination. How long do we have? The enforcement fleet will arrive tomorrow morning. 6 ships heavily armed. Jake nodded grimly. Thank you for warning us. That took courage. As he walked away to alert station security, Zixandra felt the weight of her choice settling around her. She had betrayed her own government to protect humans she had known for less than a week. According to everything she had been taught, this should feel wrong. Instead, it felt like the first truly right thing she had ever done. That evening, Jake called an emergency meeting of all station personnel. The main assembly hall buzzed with worried conversations as humans, aliens, and mixed species families gathered. "People," Jake began, "we have a situation. The Velothi government considers human culture to be a contaminating influence on other species. Tomorrow they're sending ships to enforce what they call quarantine procedures." Worried murmurs filled the hall. Dr. Chen stood up. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means they want to suppress human emotional and cultural expression to prevent it from affecting other species," Jake explained. "They see our friendship, our creativity, our emotional connections as a disease that needs to be cured." An alien voice spoke from the back of the hall. It belonged to Korath, a traitor from the Xylani Republic who had been living on the station for 2 years. "Commander Morrison, I must tell you something. The Velothi are not the only government with these concerns. My own people have issued warnings about excessive human contact. They say it makes us too unpredictable, too willing to question authority." Another alien, an engineer named Vex from the Horta Collective, raised a tentacled appendage. "My government has similar policies. They limit human contact to essential trade only. They say human influence makes workers less efficient." More aliens began speaking up, revealing that their governments had all implemented restrictions on human cultural exchange. The picture that emerged was disturbing. A galaxy of species so afraid of human influence that they had created elaborate systems to prevent their citizens from experiencing human friendship, creativity, and emotional connection. "But why?" asked Lisa. "What's so threatening about friendship and laughter?" Zixandra found herself standing without conscious decision. All eyes turned to her, including Ambassador Kethvar's cold stare from where he sat with the Velothi delegation. "I can answer that," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "They are afraid because human culture reveals what we have lost." Kethvar rose sharply. "Zixandra, you will be silent." "No," she said, and the word felt like breaking chains. "I will not be silent anymore." She turned to address the crowd. "My people pride themselves on logic and efficiency. We eliminated emotion thousands of years ago because we believed it made us weak. But watching humans, I have learned that emotion does not make you weak. It makes you strong in ways we cannot understand. The delegate is suffering from severe contamination," Kethvar announced to the crowd. "Her statements are not rational." "Perhaps not rational," Zixandra agreed. "But they are true. Humans do not just survive, you thrive. You create art and music and food not because you need to, but because you want to. You form connections with other beings based on choice, not just biological necessity. You solve problems through creative thinking, not just logical analysis." She looked directly at Kethvar. "And you are terrified because deep down you know we could learn to do the same. You know that human culture doesn't weaken other species. It shows them how much stronger they could be." The hall erupted in discussion. Aliens who had been quietly living human-influenced lives for months or years began speaking up about their experiences. Korath described how human friendship had taught him to question unfair policies in his government. Vex explained how human creativity had helped her develop new engineering solutions. Others shared stories of personal growth, emotional development, and expanded consciousness. Kethvar's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "This gathering is illegal under galactic contamination protocols. All participants will be subject to quarantine procedures." "Like hell they will," Jake said firmly, stepping forward. "This is human space, Ambassador. Our laws apply here, not when galactic security is threatened. The enforcement fleet has legal authority to implement quarantine measures by any means necessary." The implications of his words sent a chill through the crowd. The Velothi weren't just planning to isolate individuals. They were preparing to use force against anyone who had been contaminated by human culture. Zixandra looked around the hall at the mixed group of humans and aliens, all of whom had found something valuable in cultural exchange. These beings had become stronger, more creative, more emotionally healthy through their contact with humanity. The idea of destroying that growth to maintain authoritarian control was not just wrong. It was evil. "There is something else you should know," she announced to the crowd. "I am not the only one who has been changed by human contact. There are others throughout the galaxy, members of dozens of species who have experienced human culture in secret. We communicate through hidden networks, sharing art and music and stories. The contamination you fear has already spread far beyond what your governments realize." Kethvar's face showed the first real emotion she had ever seen from him. Fury mixed with fear. You have been operating an illegal cultural exchange network? We have been learning how to live instead of just exist, Zixandra replied. And tomorrow, when your enforcement fleet arrives, you will discover just how many beings prefer contamination to sterility. She turned back to the crowd. The choice is simple. We can submit to quarantine and lose everything that makes life worth living, or we can stand together and show the galaxy that diversity makes us stronger, not weaker. The hall fell silent as everyone considered her words. Then Jake stepped forward. New Horizon Station hereby declares itself a sanctuary for any being seeking cultural freedom. We will not submit to quarantine, and we will not allow emotional sterilization procedures on any sentient being. One by one, others began standing in support. First Lisa, then the human crew members, then the aliens who had been living on the station. Finally, even some of the junior Velothi diplomats rose, defying their own ambassador's authority. Kethavar looked around the hall with growing horror. You are all infected, all contaminated beyond hope of recovery. No, Zixandra said quietly. We are all finally alive outside the station. Stars continued their ancient dance across the darkness. But inside, something new was being born. A coalition of beings who had chosen growth over safety, connection over isolation, and freedom over control. Tomorrow would bring the enforcement fleet and the greatest test any of them had ever faced. But tonight, they had each other. And that would have to be enough. In her quarters, Zixandra prepared for what might be her last night of freedom. She thought about the taste of human food, the sound of shared laughter, the warmth of friendship freely. Dawn came too quickly to New Horizon Station. Jake Morrison stood on the command deck, watching 6 massive Velothi enforcement ships arrange themselves in a perfect attack formation around the station. Each vessel was 3 times larger than anything in the human fleet, bristling with weapons that could reduce the station to atoms in minutes. Incoming transmission, reported Communications Officer Brad Walsh. Put it through. The main screen filled with the image of a Velothi military commander, her pale features showing no more emotion than carved stone. Human Station New Horizon. This is Enforcement Commander Veltara. You are harboring contaminated individuals in violation of galactic health protocols. Surrender them immediately for proper quarantine procedures. Jake stepped forward. Commander Veltara, this is Commander Morrison. We do not recognize your authority in human space. New Horizon Station is a sovereign territory. Your sovereignty is irrelevant when galactic security is threatened. You have 30 minutes to comply before we implement forced quarantine measures. The transmission ended. Jake turned to his bridge crew, seeing worry and determination in equal measure on their faces. Sir, said his tactical officer, our defenses won't last 5 minutes against those ships. Then we better hope we don't have to fight, Jake replied. In the station's main assembly hall, hundreds of beings had gathered despite the danger. Humans, Velothi, Zilani, Horta, and a dozen other species stood together, many holding hands or tentacles or whatever appendages their biology provided. At the center of the group, Zixandra stood with Dr. Lisa Chen, both of them coordinating what they called Operation Cultural Freedom. The network is ready, Zixandra announced. Our contacts throughout the galaxy are standing by. What exactly is this network? Jake asked through the comm system. For 3 years, beings from dozens of species have been secretly sharing human culture, Lisa explained. Art, music, literature, cooking recipes, even philosophical discussions. They've been hiding this from their governments, but today we're going public. How does that help us against 6 warships? Zixandra smiled, an expression that would have horrified Ambassador Kethavar. Commander Morrison, you are about to see why your species is so feared by authoritarian governments. Humans don't just adapt to challenges. You inspire others to adapt with you. At exactly the 29-minute mark, something unprecedented happened across the galaxy. On dozens of worlds and hundreds of cities, members of various alien species simultaneously began what they called the Great Revelation. On the Velothi homeworld, young diplomats gathered in public squares and began singing human songs, their voices carrying melodies that had been illegal for centuries. On Zilani trade stations, workers started sharing human food recipes and creating art inspired by human creativity. Horta engineering collectives began implementing problem-solving techniques learned from human approaches to innovation. The effect was immediate and electric. Governments that had spent decades suppressing human influence suddenly found their own citizens openly embracing it. Protests erupted not in anger, but in celebration, beings dancing to human music, sharing human stories, expressing emotions they had been taught to suppress. On New Horizon Station, they watched the Galactic Communications Network explode with reports of contamination outbreaks on dozens of worlds. How is this possible? Jake asked in amazement. Humans taught us something our governments never understood, Zixandra explained. They taught us that culture is not a weapon to be feared, but a gift to be shared. For 3 years, we have been quietly learning how to live instead of just survive. Today, we stop hiding. The tactical display showed something that made Jake's heart skip. Ships were approaching from multiple directions, but they weren't Velothi enforcement vessels. They were traders, civilian transports, even some military vessels from various species, all converging on New Horizon Station. Commander Morrison, came a new voice over the communications system. This is Captain Korath of the Zilani Republic. My government ordered me to stay away from your station, but I am officially disobeying those orders. The Zilani Third Fleet stands with New Horizon. More voices followed. Horta engineering ships, independent traders, even some Velothi civilian vessels declared their support for the station. Within an hour, New Horizon was surrounded not just by enforcement ships, but by the largest multi-species fleet in galactic history. Enforcement Commander. Veltara's next transmission carried the first hint of uncertainty Jake had ever heard from a Velothi. Unidentified vessels. You are interfering with lawful quarantine operations. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. The response came not from one ship, but from dozens speaking in unison, a harmony of different species united by a common purpose. Commander Veltara, this is the Free Cultural Alliance. We do not withdraw. We do not submit to quarantine. We choose freedom. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Humanity had not only inspired other species to embrace emotion and creativity, they had taught them to stand up for those values against overwhelming odds. The standoff continued for several tense hours. Veltara's ships had superior firepower, but they were outnumbered 10-1 by vessels whose crews had experienced human culture and refused to give it up. Finally, a new transmission came through, not from the enforcement fleet but from the Velothi homeworld itself. The image that appeared on screen was unprecedented, a Velothi official showing visible signs of emotional stress. Enforcement Commander Veltara, this is High Counselor Mordain. You are ordered to stand down immediately and return to base. High Counselor, the contamination must be contained. The infected beings represent a threat to galactic stability. No, Commander. The infected beings represent something we failed to understand. They represent evolution. The High Counselor's image shifted to address New Horizon Station directly. Commander Morrison, the Velothi High Council formally requests negotiations. Events across the galaxy have made it clear that human cultural influence cannot be stopped by force. Perhaps it is time we learned why our citizens prefer contamination to purity. Jake looked around the assembly hall at the gathered beings, humans and aliens standing together, supporting each other, creating something greater than any single species could achieve alone. This was what had terrified the galactic governments, not chaos or weakness, but the unstoppable power of beings choosing to grow together instead of stagnating apart. High Counselor Mordain, New Horizon Station welcomes peaceful negotiations, but we have conditions. State them. No more quarantine procedures, no more emotional sterilization, no more laws preventing cultural exchange between willing participants. There was a long pause before the Velothi official responded. These are significant changes to galactic policy. These are basic rights for all sentient beings, Jake replied firmly. Ambassador Kethavar's voice suddenly cut through the communications. High Counselor, you cannot negotiate with contaminated individuals. Their judgment is compromised. No, Kethavar, came the unexpected reply. Our judgment was compromised. We let fear of change blind us to the possibility of growth. The High Counselor looked directly at the camera. The Velothi Empire formally recognizes the right of all beings to voluntary cultural exchange. The quarantine protocols are hereby suspended pending full review of our policies. Similar announcements began coming in from other governments across the galaxy. The Great Revelation had forced a fundamental shift in galactic politics. Species that had spent centuries in isolation were suddenly opening their borders to cultural exchange. In the days that followed, New Horizon Station became the unofficial capital of what the media called the Cultural Revolution, binge. From across the galaxy arrived to experience human culture firsthand and to share their own traditions in return. Zix. Andra found herself serving as an unofficial ambassador for the new alliance, helping other species understand how to balance cultural openness with their own unique identities. She still worked with Velothi diplomats, but now her emotional responses were seen as assets rather than contamination. One evening, as the station hosted its first official multi-species cultural festival, she stood with Jake and Lisa watching hundreds of beings from dozens of worlds sharing food, music, art, and laughter. "Do you ever miss the simplicity of your old life?" Lisa asked. Zixandra considered the question while watching a group of young Velothi learning to cook human pasta from Tony, their faces showing expressions of joy that would have been impossible under the old system. "I miss the certainty," she admitted. "Life was predictable when we followed strict rules and suppressed all emotions. But predictable is not the same as good. And now I wake up every day not knowing exactly what will happen, but excited to find out. I have learned that uncertainty can be beautiful when you face it with friends." Jake smiled. "That might be the most human thing anyone has ever said." "Good," Zixandra replied. "I am proud to be contaminated by human values. Your species taught the galaxy something we had forgotten, that growth requires risk, that strength comes from diversity, and that the best way to survive is to help others thrive." The festival continued around them, a celebration of everything that made life worth living. Music and laughter filled the air along with the aromas of foods from